Hello everyone, I'm back to the videos. I've been out of action for a while. My camera broke and I've been quite busy with things, so it's been a while. But I wanted to do an update because recently I've started working with a group which is being led by Alice Despard. I've already shared one of the videos from those sessions, which was based on meditations on the tarot and the work of Meebs and how the tetragrammaton is used systematically in the work of the tarot. And after that, I felt as if I just had an impulse and a feeling that we should start to have a look at the biography of Valentin Tomberg. It isn't something I'd thought about approaching before because obviously he was famously hermetic. He didn't want to inspire a cult of personality to form around him. He was private in his later life, very devoted to prayer and wasn't seeking attention. And of course Meditations on the Tarot was published anonymously. However, I just had an inkling that it was time we got to know this master of Christian hermeticism a little bit better. Now, a wonderful biography is available, written by Liesl Heckman, with help I think from Michael French. Was it Michael French? Yeah, this one has help from Michael French. And this is a fantastic book, but it is only available in German. I don't speak German, so picking my way through this was laborious, difficult, and not quite satisfying, but it did afford me such a tantalising glimpse of one of my great, I suppose, heroes, teachers, friends, however you would like to call him. And I just felt as if for people who love his work, there's a huge appetite to know more about him, and for English speakers it's quite difficult to get beyond the basics, even though you can find the basics on the internet. Further to that, it was Dark Journalist actually who mentioned this book, The Circle of 12 by Claudia McLaren-Lainson, which is quite different. It's not a biography. This is looking at Tomberg from an anthroposophical, well, breakaway anthroposophical perspective, because this obviously isn't the mainstream anthroposophical view, because the mainstream doesn't like him and would rather cancel him. But this is a really interesting book as well, looking at the more esoteric aspects of his personality and his biography, looking at potential past lives, different spiritual streams, all within the anthroposophical cosmology. So I did do a talk with Alice's group a couple of weeks ago where we sort of plunged into this. Well, you've seen the size of the books, and for one meeting trying to get through a biography of such a titanic personality, of such immense import for the spiritual life of humanity, and also historically, being somebody who lived through the whole of the Russian Revolution, survived Hitler, moved throughout Europe, gaining incredible spiritual initiations along the way. So that's no simple matter to just encapsulate his life. So, but we did what we could, and that video is available on Alice's channel. I'll leave a link to that below. Now, from what I could glean from my poor German translations from the book, there were some really interesting details, and one of them in particular just leapt out at me and gave me a kind of wow, a eureka moment, an epiphany, because so many pieces of the puzzle to do with his life fell into place when I read this, to the point that I thought I must draw this to the attention of more people involved in working with Valentin Tomberg's corpus of spiritual writing, because there are certain things that have hampered the widespread uptake of his teaching, which is so valuable now. at this crux point for humanity, the turning point, another turning point, not the turning point of history, because that's a place that was occupied by the life of Jesus Christ, but we are at a turning point. And Valentin Tomberg's work can help us go in the best possible direction for the spiritual evolution of humanity. And one thing that has really been holding that back is the conflict with anthroposophy. Now, we all know that Valentin Tomberg, he converted to Roman Catholicism in the middle years of his life, and there were particular reasons for this. He'd been ejected from anthroposophy. Around that time, World War II was about to start. He wanted to work with a spiritual group to combat the forces of evil, the forces of the beast, the Antichrist influence, as he saw it coming from two angles, obviously, Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany. And he believed that the Catholic Church was the only institution powerful enough and cohesive enough to provide an organised resistance to that. So, we can, one way of looking at his expulsion from the Anthroposophical Society will be to say, well, it had to happen because he needed to be in the church in order to build that spiritual Christian resistance to Nazism and Stalinism. So that's one thing, but, as readers of Meditations on the Tarot know, one of the expressed spiritual aims of Valentin Tomberg, aside from this great spiritual resistance to the Antichrist impulses, was to unite the churches of John and Peter. So the Church of Peter is the exoteric church, the established church, the institutionalised church of religion as we know it, epitomised by the Catholic Church. And the Church of John is the esoteric stream, the secret stream, the Rosicrucian, I suppose, in some respects, also the anthroposophical, although this becomes complicated because something went seriously wrong with anthroposophy, as indeed it did with the Catholic Church, but let's think a bit longer on anthroposophy, because he wasn't rejected from Catholicism as he was from anthroposophy. And what I read in his biography seemed to go right to the heart of the matter of why this expulsion occurred. The roots were set earlier, so it's fairly well known that after his escape from Russia, he went to Estonia, where he made contact with the Russian emigre community there. He also, they included the kind of cream of the crop of the occultists who'd been working with Mebs and Shmakov prior to the revolution. He met with Nina Rudnikova, who was a star pupil of Mebs, and she initiated him into all the tarot work. I'm sure that he met others of the White Russian Sisters, as they were called, a fascinating group of ladies who were spreading spiritual knowledge at that time as well. Anyway, they initiated him into the occult works, and before long he also joined the Anthroposophical Society. He'd already been reading books of Rudolf Steiner, but it was in Estonia that he really became established as an anthroposophist, and he was part of the foundation of the Estonian branch of the society, which was led by Otto Sepp at that time. And Otto Sepp was the president and Valentin Tomberg became the vice president. Then that was how, this was still when he was in his 20s, in his mid-20s, delivering lectures all within the recognised framework of anthroposophy, totally based on Rudolf Steiner's teachings. And he made massive progress with this, as you would imagine for somebody of Tomberg's intellectual standing. He didn't just learn the teachings, he became anthroposophy. He completely took this to heart, and this is where the anecdote begins, which so triggered this moment that I read about in Elizabeth Heckman's book. And she writes, he made such great progress in his spiritual development that dark occult groups in Estonia became increasingly aware of him. According to an acquaintance, they wanted to use him as a tool for their dark purposes. So who might they have been? It's not said, but I think that it's likely they were Russian and obviously on the side of the Bolsheviks. I'll explain a little bit more about what had happened to the occultism in Russia and St. Petersburg after the revolution, because it does tap into this. The acquaintance, who is not mentioned by name, gave Tomberg more details about the plan of the order that observed him, as well as about other people who were also to serve the purposes of the order. Of these people, only Tomberg was a member of the Anthroposophical Society, and, as he wrote in a letter to Rudolf Steiner's widow Marie, to whom he was close at this time, "It was said of me alone that I am a person who has not yet recognised his opportunities, but who, when he recognises them, will hinder our cause in Russia, our being the Dark Order." Now he is being taught by Dr. Steiner. But if he succeeds in establishing a connection with that spiritual entity behind anthroposophy, if he becomes its tool, then he will be able to seriously harm us. And of course, Tomberg absolutely wanted to combat the Antichrist forces which had arisen during the Bolshevik Revolution, and we can only imagine that if he had become leader of the Anthroposophical Society, as really he possibly ought to have done, we can only imagine what resistance he might have been able to form, although he would have then been stuck with the Nazis, so, you know, it's never easy. His letter continues. Further, my acquaintance told me what he was told. This is what the order said. If someone bothers us, then we warn him. If the warning does not work, then we tear out his mental centre, and after 5 to 6 months he will go crazy. My acquaintance also informed me that in his opinion, though he cannot prove this, they really could threaten me with such a danger. In his opinion, they form a chain, and by themselves gathering at rhythmic intervals, they direct their united forces of thought and will to anyone they choose. Tomberg then went on to ask Marie Steiner for advice. What more could he do to combat this enemy other than the regular mental exercises and prayers he already engaged in? She didn't respond to his appeal. I don't believe she was snobbing him in any way. She was at this point really his mentor. She possibly just didn't know what to say. Now I think we have to take this seriously. You know, this isn't some hysterical conspiracy theorist writing about his fear of Dark Order. This is one of the greatest spiritual teachers of our age. Somebody who, you know, whose books John Paul II read. And we know for a fact that there were many orders working. The occult, the number of occult orders in Russia at this time was absolutely enormous. This had been going on for hundreds of years. The situation changed after the revolution because the whole society of Russia changed, was even destroyed. In fact, these orders splintered. What we might call the true streams had to go underground, or they escaped, hence the Mebes group. Mebes himself was sent to a gulag. Nina Rudnikova escaped, gave her notes to a couple of different people who preserved the work. So the real work went underground. But there were other orders that tried to survive within the constraints of the Bolsheviks. And some of them, you know, have tried to convince the Bolshevik government that they could be used to further their aims. And we know that even though they tried to kill God, certainly to kill Christianity and the whole of the Christian faith, any true religion, that they totally, completely understood occult principles. Lenin achieved the highest degree of Freemasonry. He was embalmed, he's in a tomb, you know, which is a bit like a pyramid or a ziggurat, embalmed in there. Stalin had been a priest. The whole of, you know, their Russia was built along occult lines. Dark, dark magicians they were, as were the Nazis. And they, you know, knew exactly what they were doing. They had a lot of knowledge at their disposal. They began to build an egregore of immense power, which has never stopped growing since. Tomberg was aware of this, and it's a terrible irony, really, that when Tomberg moved to England, a place that was very welcoming to him, England loved him, still does. It was hard for him to get a job in post-war, you know, post-war Britain. But he did eventually get a job with the BBC, and he was translating messages that they were intercepting from Russia during the Cold War. And day in, day out, he had to listen to their lies and propaganda, you know, and it was going into his soul, and it was a terrible thing for this incredibly sensitive spiritual being who knew the truth, knew exactly what was happening. He alone, you could say, perhaps knew what was happening, because nobody at the BBC, you know, they might have known at a political level, of course, at a social level, but at a spiritual level, the number of people capable of grasping what was happening is infinitesimally small. You know, some of them, the leaders had been sent to gulags, they'd started, or dispersed, you know, they'd gone to Central and South America, just disappeared, really, from public view completely, and left a very small underground. Now, the use of the word chain in that excerpt really interested me, because we hear this word again and again. Tomberg himself uses it in Meditations on the Tarot when he talks about the unbroken chain of initiation that goes back through the ages, through the initiates. This is the primordial tradition. It is an unbroken chain of people who are initiated down through the ages into the secret wisdom, the secret teaching, and this is probably the wonderful thing about it, because an individual can go into this work and be a part of that chain, be a link in that chain, in this world, this universe encompassing network, which is to further the cause of humanity and to resist the machinations of the Antichrist. Meebs also used the word chain. In the realm of magic, a chain is very important. And this chain, you know, we want it to get stronger. And of course, this other order, they're also using a chain. And we can only imagine by now what they've managed to achieve, because look what happened. He had written that to Marie Steiner in 1927, or thereabouts, at which point he was completely in the ascendancy in the Anthroposophical Society, and indeed, when Otto Sepp died, I believe in 1932, Valentin Tomberg became the president of the Estonian branch. And by 1933, he'd started to publish his Old Testament studies and to step into that role. He'd begun to produce the anthroposophical, the sublime works of anthroposophy, which are still the masterworks of that whole school, culminating, of course, in the return of Christ in the etheric, because what is anthroposophy for, if not to lay the foundations and open the way for the return of the Christ in the etheric? This is what it's about. So he presented us with this, but at the same time, then the conflicts began. There were different reasons for this. The death of Rudolf Steiner, of course, had led to a lot of problems, and it's inevitable in when you have such a powerful charismatic leader upon whom so much depends, that when they go there will be fragmentation. Valentin Tomberg's divorce from his first wife and his marriage to Marie, even though she was absolutely, completely his soulmate and the perfect choice, that had been controversial. But for one reason or another, they came to mistrust him, and by the end of the 1930s, Valentin Tomberg had been expelled from the Anthroposophical Society. And when I look at this chain of events, I just can't help thinking about this dark order that was working for exactly this to happen. Now, wouldn't it be good if anthroposophists could also look at those events and think, well, yes, we fell prey to that malign influence. There are other reasons as well. We know that Tomberg had to go into the church in order to consolidate this resistance to the Nazis. But the fact remains really that there's a get-out clause here for anthroposophy. They can lay down their arms and their hostility towards Valentin Tomberg and turn this thing around if they want. Because who is leading it now? Who are the great figures in anthroposophy for us all to look up to? Who is doing more than simply recycling and rehashing the words of the master gone? Still great words, but who is really advancing it? I would say it's the Tombergians. Judith von Haller. People who are working with Valentin Tomberg's work, trying to keep that door open and to maintain the living spiral of the tradition so that it doesn't just become a closed circle. So I'd be quite interested to know what other readers of Tomberg thought about this. To what I'm sure there's obviously people who've already read the German book will have read this as well, as I'm not really in touch with them as much as the English speakers. I'm not sure of their thoughts, but I've not really heard of this spoken of anywhere before, and I'd love to know what you think. And I'm going to follow up actually with trying to drill down to what that order might have been. I do have, it's difficult to find information about this kind of thing. I mean, I've read some interesting essays, especially by Konstantin Burmistrov, who's one of the experts on esotericism in Soviet and pre-Soviet Russia. And he looks at a lot of the initiatory groups, and one of them in particular, what he writes about the order Mesh Redivus. This really caught my attention because of what they said their goals were. You know, for anyone who doubts the ambitions of occultists, then the Mesh Redivus would sort of put pay to any ideas that they only had humble ambitions. I'll just read a little bit of this out because it is quite interesting. This is from Burmistrov's essay, Esotericism in Soviet Russia in the 1920s to 30s. The Mesh order was founded in 1926 in Moscow by the economist and professional occultist Eugenie Karlovich-Tager and Vadim Karlovich-Tchaikovsky, a meteorologist and physicist who was especially interested in telepathy and parapsychology. According to one of their members, its name, Mesh, denoted the reborn, renewed unity of the three planes of being, mental, astral and physical, symbolised by the three mother letters of the Jewish mystic treatise Sefer Yetzirah, of course those being Aleph, Mem and Shin, Mesh. making up the acronym. By origin, the organisation was directly linked to the pre-revolutionary Martinist order led by Czeslaw and Mebes. Mebes spawned so many orders. He was the master. According to certain data, this secret group Mesh, or a secret group Mesh, a precursor I think, had existed in St. Petersburg in the 1900s to the 1910s, and it was from this group that the Moscow order received its initiation and the necessary literature in the 1920s. By then, though, the 1920s were not the 1900s, because there's no more Tsar. The members of the order referred to themselves as Rosicrucians, and their organisation as a branch of the Russian branch of the Kabbalistic Order of the Rose and Cross. And with its centre in France, in Russia, it's led by Mebes. The order sought to surpass, because Mebes was still working up until about 1926, he was just working underground. The order sought to surpass all existing occult organisations, including Masonic ones, that is, apart from the theory, it set itself the aim to realise theory in practice by attaining power that enables implementation. This expression must be considered as the endeavour to establish initiation to magic on a worldwide scale. According to Tager, the magicians leading the order must be higher than the spiritual and secular authorities in the entire world. The order's ambitious goals actually reflect the utopian mindset and atmosphere of intellectual recovery typical of post-revolutionary Russia. Its members hoped to be able to combine the new achievements of contemporary science with the esoteric knowledge of the ancients to create or recreate real and efficient magic that would allow them to exert influence not only on the material world, but also on all the planes of being in the entire universe. The brain centre of the order was the scholar and experimenter Tchaikovsky, a specialist in the field of physics and chemistry, who spent years carrying out experiments establishing the influence of coloured light on the human psyche. It sounds like Goethe. And telepathy. He worked with the State Brain Institute, headed by Vladimir Bekacherev, and the Society for the Study of Psychology, Neurology and Hypnology in Leningrad. So you can only imagine, let's say that these guys have good and noble aims, albeit with a will to power. You can only imagine if such an order becomes subverted, what might happen, given the level of teaching that was accessible to them. Tager also played an important role. He is one of the most outstanding Russian specialists in the field of occultism and familiar with virtually all the existing esoteric schools and traditions. It is significant that the majority of the organisation's members were Germans or Poles by birth, graduates of the well-known Evangelical Reform School of the Holy Apostles Peter and Paul in Moscow, and that nationalist and anti-Semitic views were rife among them. Moreover, the leaders of the order had a wide contact network in both the occult and the academic scenes. Very easy to see how they might have linked up with the like of the Thule Society in Germany. This is not the place for a detailed history of the order. Okay, let me just see. So, they were, taken over by the secret police. Tchaikovsky was sent to the labour camp in the Slevsky Islands. I think Mebes was sent there as well, and executed soon afterwards for his active involvement in the preparation of a prisoner breakout, while Tager spent the remaining years of his life in exile and imprisonment. There were different levels of initiation to this order, as in any esoteric organisation, so as a consequence the majority of its members were ignorant of its ultimate goals. As occult organisations were forbidden in the USSR, the leaders of the order concealed their activities. The order had been granted the legal status of a scientific laboratory for research into the subject of telepathy, closely collaborating with the Brain Institute of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, so this is probably the inception of the psychic spying that became such a big issue during the Cold War. Some of the participating scholars knew nothing about the occult and magical motives underlying the group's activities, so they were probably academic. The goal of the order's secret activity, on the other hand, was the mastery of occult methods for controlling the elemental spirits, the so-called elementalia. In the underground laboratory that was situated in the basement of a house on the Malia Lubyanka 16, they studied ways of calling upon and coagulating elementalia with the help of narcotics and strong hallucinogenic substances, so they're already going way off-piste from Christian emetic work. In order to carry out these experiments, the order's members searched for wild magical and medicinal herbs in the outskirts of Moscow and made plans for growing them in dedicated plantations. There's a strong shamanic aspect to this, which is of course native to Russia. We had Rasputin doing the same. The place for the laboratory had been chosen deliberately. This is grim. Its close proximity to the cellars of the OGPU, one of their secret police, in which people were being tortured and shot, was supposed to make it easier to trap the elementalia and the larvae that had been attracted by the suffering and the blood of the victims. Okay? It's very easy to see how this goes dark, because it already is dark. We know also that Tchaikovsky used the laboratory to carry out experiments in envoltation, that is, a mental attack accomplishing by a ceremonial magic ritual, the result of which could be either death or complete mental depression or illness. So it would not surprise me one little bit if, even though the leaders weren't involved in it, people from this group were the ones targeting Tomberg. Or they'd learned because they were at this institute in Moscow. The theoretical sessions that were held on the same premises comprised lectures on practical magic, arcanology, Kabbalistics, graphology, astrology and other occult disciplines, as well as organic and inorganic chemistry, botany and medicine. The main sources of instruction were handwritten brochures received from the order's leader Lev Motyushev in Leningrad, a military chemical engineer and a member of the pre-revolutionary occult order, Mesh, order name Aleph. Meebs's course in the Encyclopedia of Occultism was also used. Meebs did teach dark and light initiations, as we've mentioned already, alongside various other handbooks, including the lithograph edition of Tsar Denoil, Karl Brand Leprachty's Occultism, Swami Vivekananda's work as well. According to Tchaikovsky, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, there were 4 different levels in our organisation. The first was for individuals who did not know about the existence of the organisation. The second was for people who, while following the course, had begun to suspect the existence of an unknown occult organisation with a magical bias. The third was for people who knew about the existence of the organisation and had formed some understanding about its aims, but did not know its name, structure or main positions. The fourth level comprised people, only men, who were familiar with the name and aims of the organisation and had the right to acquaint themselves with all materials at the organisation's disposal. At the same time, members at this level did not have the right to have in their personal possession material and information relating to other similar organisations if they had dealt with them beforehand. He also identified 9 levels or stages of promotion for the Order's members. So this is 1. The scientific study of metaphysical phenomena that find expression mostly in works on telepathy and clairvoyance. 2. A course on arcanology and the beginning of occult training. 3. Occult magical practice. 4. The centre Mesh Redivus, which does not pretend to have attained the fullness of occult possibilities. 5. The same after the creation of an appropriate base for serious occult and magical practice over a number of years. 6. The same after the attainment of certain results and after the beginning of the creation of a world centre for occult magic, either on the territory of the USSR or abroad. 7. A world centre for occult magic that has full control of the astral plane. And I think they've made quite a lot of progress, by the way, with that. 8. The same with full control of the mental plane, well, yep, we know what's happening to brains, don't we? They're being washed. 9, the same with full control of the divine plane. No, they're certainly not there. The 9 levels were divided into 3 groups, each consisting of 3 consecutive stages according to criteria. The first was concerned with the periphery, the second with the centre, that being Mesh Redivus, as a tool for the creation of a world centre for the occult that would have complete mastery of all occult knowledge and the opportunity to put this knowledge into practice. Finally, the third group was concerned with the world centre for occult magic that would command these opportunities and use them to serve the cultural process and all humanity. Thus the Order's goals were hugely ambitious and extended to the attainment of world supremacy. In the USSR, it was not possible to attain anything beyond the 4th stage, which is the creation of Mesh Redivus. Not possible then, because they had to wait for science to catch up with the magical aims, because this would be the material means by which they achieved these goals. Later, the Order's leaders entertained serious plans to flee abroad and implement their activities in more favourable conditions. However, their plans were foiled by the state security organs at an early preparatorial stage. Our knowledge of the Order's doctrine is limited, mainly to the information Tchaikovsky himself gave to investigators, trying to convince them of the usefulness of Rosicrucian ideas for Soviet authorities. As we can easily see, the Order's cosmology and anthropology are reworkings and adaptations of the ideas of Stanislas de Guaita, Papus and Mebes. So what we are faced with is a subversion of something that had already gone too far, a subversion of Martinism in the field of black magic. Okay, so we see now the egregore, they all have their egregore, and this is that. And then they start talking about how the universe, their conception of the universe consisting of 5 layers or planes, Kabbalistic principles underpinning this, beginning with the divine plane, Alam, Atziluth, which the upper world of radiance, then Ein Sof, the upper abyss, God, the real pole of being. He then talks about the salamander, fire, the radiant state, and then that's all, okay, that's all number 1. Then we've got the mental plane, Aleph, Olam Habriya, the world of creation, the world of transcendental reason, primary causality, the 10 Sephiroth, 10 names of God, spirit of the Christian hermits. 3, the astral plane, Mem, Olam HaYetzirah, the world of spiritual hierarchies, the world of transcendental emotional origins, the world of secondary causalities, the 7 planets, 12 signs of the zodiac, the soul of the Christian hermits, undines, water, the liquid state. Then we have 4, the physical or material plane, shin, Alam HaAsiya, the world of the elements, the material physical world, the illusory world, the Maya of the Indians, the body of the Christian hermits, gnomes, earth, the solid state, and 5, the lower abyss. So, okay, so this is what we're up against. The subversion of this plan, or the seizing of this plan by black adepts who have been incredibly active in the world since then, building this monster which we see manifesting in the transhumanist agenda. Clearly, obviously, that is, you know, we've got so many, we've got CERN, we've got HARP, everything to do with AI and artificial intelligence is tapping into this. Obviously they've gained a huge amount of control in the astral plane, and the mental plane, especially recently. Now, because that's been manifesting in the physical, they're putting the letter shin as the key to this level, which, well, anybody who's studied meditations on the tarot, any of this type of work knows that shin is the letter that's been put into our mind constantly throughout the course of this work. Shin. How many, you know, it's the one letter in Meditations on the Tarot that it just leaps out. In the work of Meebs, no other letter is given more prominence than shin. Okay, there's the tetragrammaton. Every arcane has a letter, but it is shin where the greatest secrets are concealed. And we'll remember from the Force Arcanum, the centre of the tarot, in the Meebs work, when he's describing the shin element in various times in occult history, that he does not authorise publication of the shin element. Well, this is now the time when we have to rediscover what he meant. Okay? That's it for now. Please comment.